some source of water, that could also be a problem. Starvation, certainly, for the same reasons. And finally, the elements, the weather. We saw a lot of rain here yesterday, Joey. Some places that may have otherwise been air voids could have unfortunately been flooded, and that's certainly something on the minds of people who are out at Ground Zero trying to find some of these bodies. All those things are certainly obstacles, but as I said, there is a degree of optimism that we're still seeing amongst the doctors, amongst the rescue workers. Every time an ambulance pulls up behind me here, everyone's looking to see if maybe there's a survivor that has been pulled out from Ground Zero, and certainly there's a lot of people here still looking for that. Joey.
We're all eager to hear that. Dr. Sanjay Gupta from CNN's medical unit. Thanks very much. Wolf?
Thank you. Joey.
Let's check our top stories. As of this moment, President Bush today declared the United States is at war. He called on the United States fighting men and women to stand ready. He also warned the United States is fighting a new enemy on a battlefield without defined boundaries. Rescue efforts at the Pentagon and in lower Manhattan continue today. In New York, as the rubble and debris is cleared, the death toll rises. And the New York Fire Department honors 3 fallen leaders. At the Pentagon, U.S. officials begin to measure the damage and estimate the cost of rebuilding. One preliminary figure from Reuters places it in the hundreds of millions of dollars. In Manhattan, fire and rescue operations continue. New York firefighters laid to rest a few of their own. Funerals for Fire Chief Gonsi and First Deputy Commissioner William Feehan were held today. They were among the hundreds of firefighters killed in the Twin Tower attacks. Fire Chaplain Michael Judge was also buried today. Joey?
On Monday, the New York Stock Exchange will ring its opening bell once again and begin trading for the first time since Tuesday's attacks. Question, though, that remains, how have the attacks affected the U.S. economy? You get the latest from CNN's Greg Clarkin of CNN Financial News. Greg, what are the expectations for Monday?
Well, at this point, Joey, first and foremost, folks are just relieved that trading will begin on Monday. It's a significant event, not only for the impact on the economy here in the U.S. and the world markets, but also very deep in symbolic value for the U.S. Now, Dick Grasso is the chairman and CEO of the New York Stock Exchange. He said he really wanted to get trading up running as soon as possible after they tested the systems at the NYSE in Lower Manhattan, and that's exactly what technicians there did for a few hours this morning, going over the various infrastructure, the various telecommunications, voice and data networks at the exchange to make sure that no bugs would be found and that things could get up and running smoothly so that members at the exchange as well as brokerages off-site could be able to communicate and process trades and execute orders on Monday morning. So all systems were go today. The tests proved very successful. The NASDAQ also conducted tests throughout the day, and they termed results of their tests terrific. Now, as for the impact of trading, a lot of folks are expecting to see at least an initial sell-off in the markets. You have to remember there's a lot of companies, a lot of industries that will be especially hard hit by this tragedy. First and foremost, the insurance companies as well as the airlines. You're expected to see heavy selling in that. And then after that sell-off, where things go at this point remains a point of debate. A lot of folks are urging prudence and some calm to the markets on Monday, basically to restore a sense of stability to the equity markets. Now, as for Grasso himself, he says this prolonged shutdown of the stock exchange may actually benefit things.
Investors have had this time frame to step back and take a reasoned approach, take a thoughtful approach to their investments, to what this event has meant to America. And I'm hopeful that that will return a rationality to otherwise what would have been an irrational resumption of trading.
Now, as for other aspects of this tragedy, the New York Stock Exchange, located just a couple of blocks east of the World Trade Center, has the logistical problems to deal with. They've been working very hard with the city to ensure that the thousands of folks that work on that floor at the New York Stock Exchange, as well as in administrative positions at the NYSE, will have access to the financial district. They're confident that there will not be a problem on Monday. When those folks do get to the NYSE, they'll find very stringent security as expected. They'll also find counselors to treat trauma as well as surgical masks for any problems with dust particles in the air and so forth. So it will be an interesting day of trading, Joey, and this is one that a lot of folks are looking forward to, just to restore some sense of stability to Wall Street.
Right, Greg, I get the impression that Wall Street really would like to send a signal that it is back in business and ready to go. I wonder also, I understand that there is an offering from the Fed to try to stimulate our thinking about the economy and moving forward there as well.
Exactly, Joe. There's a lot of talk about a possible action from the Federal Reserve in the way of a rate cut and so forth. And that's, again, just at this point, a lot of things are being considered, a lot of things being talked about, all again with the end goal of basically hoping to resume some normal, or what passes for normal, at least on Monday, and some stable trading in the equity markets. Again, a lot of apprehension over just how things will go technically with that infrastructure system, the data and voice network, as well as kind of emotionally, the emotional aspect of trading as well.
Right. You talk about the emotional aspect of trading, and I wonder if you could relate that specifically to the smaller investor. I understand what the corporate investor's psychology is, but what about handling the small investor, those of us individuals who might have money that we're wondering about and worried about here?
Sure, Joey. At this point, large and small investors, really the markets in general just do not like instability, national, global instability, anything along those lines. It tends to rattle people, and that's why a lot of folks believe that the prolonged shutdown, the 4-day shutdown, may actually have given a lot of investors, small investors, enough time to kind of digest and process the events, see how the overseas markets reacted. They sold off initially, and there was a lot of choppiness there, but they did stabilize towards the end of the week, and that may give a lot of folks encouragement here. But again, at least early on, there's a kind of a consensus that you can probably look for a bit of a sell-off. And again, you're going to see those industries that are hard hit, the insurance companies, the airlines, which at this point are really being battered. We've already seen Midway Airline go out of business. So there's a lot of feeling that those industries at least will lead the downside, lead the selling on Monday. And then again, after that, there's a lot of folks calling for kind of a sense of calm and kind of caution in the marketplace.
From CNN Financial News, Greg Clark, and thanks very much. And again, the stock exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, will ring its opening bell Monday morning at 9:30. Thanks very much, Greg. Wolf?
Joey, news organizations have spent an enormous amount of time and spent a great deal of energy covering the story. I want to check in with CNN's Howard Kurtz of Reliable Sources and the Washington Post, get a sense of how we're doing. How is the news media, the major news organizations, how are we doing?
Well, unlike other big stories, Wolf, of the O.J. or Monica or Chandra Levy variety, where there was so much sensationalism and hype, on balance, the media coverage here has been serious, it's been sober, it's been pretty sensitive. With a couple of exceptions, which I'll talk about in a moment, I would say that journalists did a terrific job of processing real-time information that was just unthinkable, unimaginable to so many of us as it was happening, as the tragedy was unfolding. And I think television, too, has served as kind of an electronic hearth around which the nation could gather, look at the familiar anchor faces to find out what was going on, what the repercussions were, and maybe to begin the process of healing.
What were those glaring mistakes that you were referring to?
Well, understandable perhaps in all the confusion. We had the morning of the tragedy reports about a car bomb exploding at the State Department. On Thursday, there were these hopeful reports on all the cable networks, ABC and CBS, about 5 people discovered in the rubble at the World Trade Center. It turned out to be a couple of firefighters who had fallen into a hole a couple of hours earlier. And on Thursday night, there were widespread reports about some of those detained at JFK and LaGuardia airports in New York having been armed with knives. My newspaper, the Washington Post, ran a banner headline about armed. Turns out they didn't have any weapons. I think also some viewers have been a little bit turned off at the constant replaying of the horrifying footage of the planes hitting the World Trade Center, not in news reports, but in bumpers and logos and even in split-screen shots when other people are being interviewed. I think there's a sense that to see it that often, to see the buildings falling, to see the people dying, kind of dehumanizes and maybe even trivializes the event. It would almost be like television showing JFK getting killed again and again every 5 minutes in 1963.
Is it too early to conclude that journalism, as you and I know it and practice it, will be changed as a result of this coverage that we've seen these past few days?
It's certainly not too early. We've seen it this week with the broadcast networks losing $100 million a day in revenue to cover this story in a serious and comprehensive way. And I think, too, there'll be more focus on the president as a wartime president. Perhaps there was less focus when the budget battles that didn't seem to engage a lot of Americans. There'll be a lot more coverage of military, global terrorism, intelligence. And I think, too, there may be some clashes ahead, Wolf, between the military and journalism, as we saw in the Gulf War, as news organizations report some information that may be embarrassing to our military and intelligence establishment in this new war. So in other words, we'll be testing the limits, and I think there's a lot of public sympathy with the administration as it tries to fight this war. I think the challenge for journalism is to get serious, but also to maintain its independence and not become an arm of the government.
Well, that raises a serious question. Is there a fear that in all the emotion and the anger, the depth of the feeling right now, that that journalists like all of us could get carried away and become sort of jingoistic in our coverage as opposed to being the objective observers that we're supposed to be?
I think that's a legitimate concern, particularly as the events fade a little bit and we get into this long, protracted situation. A journalist shouldn't be flag wavers, and journalists should certainly be respectful of national security. I want to be very clear on that, but at the same time, they need to report aggressively because the Pentagon, the CIA, and others who will be involved in this conflict are not always doing the perfect job, as we saw in the failure of intelligence in the original attack. So I think it's going to be a fine line for journalists to walk. They may lose some public sympathy, but they've got to maintain their independence and not become, as you say, jingoistic.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but despite the internet, despite everybody going to the internet, television journalism still was the place most Americans went to immediately and stood with it for hours and watched for hours and hours at a time.
That is true. The internet has served a vital purpose, but I was walking down Connecticut Avenue in downtown Washington, and I saw crowds of people gathered outside electronics stores to watch the coverage on television. It really was one of those times when television, for all its flaws, for all its excesses, despite the dwindling audience, really brought the country together. Everyone was watching, everyone was talking about it, and I think under the circumstances, there were some mistakes, there was some excess. Under the circumstances, television has stepped up to the challenge.
And you said that there's a reassurance that the American public gets from seeing familiar figures on television. Talk about that. We know in the 60s, Walter Cronkite was Uncle Walter, and everybody was reassured when they saw him after the John F. Kennedy assassination. Is there a similar process underway right now?
Well, when you have people like Peter Jennings or Dan Rather on the air for 12, 18 hours at a time, I think that does give people a sense that they are seeing people who are their friends who come into their living room, and also the grieving process. These anchors showed some emotion. They didn't just sit there and read off the prompter. This was a horrifying event for everybody, including news people. And I think as we see people being buried, as we see the rubble, as we see the victims, the anchor people, the correspondents have played a really important role in leading the country through this very difficult time.
Walk us through the next few days or weeks, if you will. Anything we should be looking toward specifically?
I think we're going to see President Bush covered round the clock already. Ari Fleischer has asked us not to report on his advanced movements for obviously security reasons. I think we're going to see news organizations ramping up in terms of their coverage of the Pentagon. We're going to have to learn a lot. You may already know it, but much of America doesn't, about Afghanistan, about Pakistan, about the global implications here, about Islam. So I really think this is the greatest challenge that journalism has faced in a long, long time. So far, I think the job has been pretty good. Given the excesses of past big stories, I'm not entirely confident it will remain that way, but if it doesn't, I'll let you know.
All right. Howard Kurtz of Reliable Sources, CNN's Reliable Sources, and the Washington Post, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Wolf.
And one of the many people killed in Tuesday's devastating terrorist violence was former federal prosecutor and conservative commentator Barbara Olson. Friends and family gathered today in Virginia to memorialize Barbara. She was one of the passengers aboard American Airlines Flight 77 that was hijacked and crashed into the Pentagon. Before the plane went down, Barbara called her husband and described what was happening. Ted Olson, the Solicitor General of the Justice Department, says his wife was not crying and didn't even sound frightened. Friends say that was indicative of Barbara, a woman who strided boldly through life.
Barbara's spirit survives in each of us, just as the spirit of our great country lives on. She lives in our memories, now dampened by tears and made hazy by grief. But she's here, her ever-present high heels clicking across the floors of this cathedral and through all the passageways of our sentiments.
Barbara Olson, a good friend to all of us here at CNN. Joey?
Less well known, but certainly respected, loved by the city of New York, deeply respected there. Hundreds of mourners gathering to pay their respects to three leaders in the New York City Fire Department killed in the line of duty on Tuesday. Among those, William Feehan, the first deputy commissioner of the New York Fire Department. Also, the New York City Fire Chief Peter Gansey, a 33-year veteran of the department, He was killed battling the flames that erupted after 2 hijacked planes tore through the Twin Towers and were laid to rest today. The New York Fire Department chaplain Michael Judge is known to many as Father Mike. He was killed as he administered last rites to one of the firefighters. A somber day of memorials in New York City. Meantime, the work continues in Lower Manhattan. CNN's Gary Tuchman is very close to the World Trade Center site, and he joins us now. Gary.